Hello hunters, I am Remo Yes Man, and today I would like to talk about Bloodborne, because Bloodborne is one of the best Souls games you'll probably never play. Now, Bloodborne is essentially a Souls game developed by FromSoft, but it's not a Souls game in the traditional sense of the language. Bloodborne is widely considered to be its own thing, so much so to the point that when Bloodborne released, we not only have the Souls-like genre, but we now have the Soulsborne genre. And that should speak to how good of a developer that FromSoft is, that FromSoft managed to create two subgenres and merge them into one. That should speak to the strength of FromSoft's creativity. Like Demon Souls, Bloodborne had the unfortunate fate of being a Sony exclusive, and it's really easy to throw shade at Sony, especially when you consider the fact that they mishandled the Demon Souls IP by not promoting the game properly. I mean, by their own admission, they mishandled that IP, but they did eventually realize the error of their ways and they acknowledged how good the game was. But one thing you have to acknowledge about Sony is, at the very least, Sony is actually investing in this product. And it can even be argued that we don't even know if we would have got the Souls franchise had it not been for Sony's initial investment. As far as Bloodborne goes, in 2015, Bloodborne would release onto the PlayStation ecosystem. Now, Bloodborne is an action role-playing game that is developed by FromSoft and published by Sony Computer Entertainment for the PS4. Bloodborne essentially follows the player character who is a hunter through a Victorian-era inspired city whose inhabitants have been inflicted by some sort of plague that are turning all the inhabitants into beasts as well as celestial beings. When you look at Bloodborne is very different from any other Souls game to be released. In fact, when you look at Sekiro, Elden Ring, and Bloodborne side by side, these games were all developed by FromSoft, but they're all vastly different from each other. And some people would even argue that out of all the Souls games to be released, Bloodborne is the most unique. And other people would argue that out of all the Souls games to be released, Bloodborne is actually the best one. But it's all a matter of preference at the end of the day. Unfortunately, as good as Bloodborne is, it still falls into the category of a Souls game you'll probably never play. Now, why is that? Well, Bloodborne had the unfortunate fate of being a Sony PlayStation exclusive. As a PlayStation exclusive, we will never see the game released on other platforms, and thus the game's true potential will never be realized. Bloodborne came out in 2015, and we have yet to see any kind of remaster, remake, or overhaul to the game in its current state. And to be honest, the game in its current state is still absolutely spectacular, but we are in a whole new console generation, and it's sad to see games like The Last of Us and The Last of Us 2, which have only been out for a few years, get complete remasters. But the thing is, seeing as it's a Sony exclusive, the earnest is on PlayStation and Sony to actually do something with the Bloodborne franchise. Now, unlike Demon Souls that did eventually receive that coveted remaster, Bloodborne seems destined to fade into obscurity because at the moment, Sony doesn't seem interested in investing in the title. And to be honest, I kinda understand why, because when you look at Souls games have always been kind of niche. So unless your name is Elden Ring, there's a good chance that FromSoft's previous games didn't get the recognition they deserve, Bloodborne being one of them. Now, Bloodborne is still a wonderful looking game, but it would be nice to have 60 FPS as well as updated visuals. But even without those things, the game still looks and plays spectacularly. Bloodborne was Sony's second collaboration with FromSoft. During the precursor to the PS4 days, Sony approached FromSoft with a proposal to create something new for the upcoming PS4, which hadn't even been announced yet. Now, At the time, Miyazaki was wrapping up the Artorias of the Abyss editions of Dark Souls, and as a result, he stated the idea of developing something new for new hardware was quite appealing, so he eagerly agreed and accepted Sony's proposal. Miyazaki. The game mechanics are a gothic theme, for example, where some ideas or concepts that were always brewing inside of me and were among those that I always wanted to achieve in my career. So when the trigger was pulled, I knew that this was it. The concept of the overall feeling of the era is very much based in Victorian era. However, the first thing that most people think of when they hear the Victorian era is probably London. The location for the game is not based in London, but instead based on remote towns that may have existed during the era. Towns that would feel really old and gloomy. The setting we made takes these old Gothic towns and layers more Victorian period elements on top of them. Miyazaki goes on to state that Bloodborne was inspired by books I read when I was younger. In a way, the story of Bloodborne is very similar to Demon's Souls. Miyazaki. I was inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's book Call of Cthulhu. Anyone who played Bloodborne will likely know how influenced I was by Lovecraft's work. This is not the first game that I drew on these inspirations, and most of my ideas are actually inspired by books. I guess there's no curveballs in that regard. I wanted to express a similar atmosphere to Bram Stoker's Dracula. We have this old city in a remote region, and it was a town renowned for its medical community, but now there is a sickness spreading called the Plague of Beasts, that kind of a setting. Miyazaki goes on to state that other sources of inspiration were horror, of course, and the film The Brotherhood of Wolves. Miyazaki. From the very start of this project, the main premise is to create a serious game for people who like games. On top of that premise, we had several themes throughout various layers of the game, and three of the major ones were exploring the unknown, the feeling of fighting for one's life, and the new online elements. With regard to exploring the unknown, we wanted to make it enjoyable to explore the locations, but we are not limiting it to just that. We are utilizing the theme to apply a plethora of concepts. We aim to make a mysterious world for the player to discover and explore. Bloodborne would go on to release in 2015, and by the end of 2015, the game had moved over 2 million units worldwide. Bloodborne won several awards and was cited as a masterpiece, and it is widely considered to be one of the greatest games ever made. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the making of Bloodborne. Thank you guys for tuning in. In my next video, I plan to do a full story and lore coverage of Bloodborne, and it will probably be a 2-hour long video, so if you like long videos, look forward to that. And if you haven't seen my Demon's Souls coverage, I would highly recommend it. Anyway guys, the best thing you can do for me at this point is just to have a beautiful day. May you find your worth in the waking world, Hunter. Peace.